Good morning, good day, good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Miller. I'm a developer marketing advisor, and I'm thrilled to be part of this year's Women on Stage event, where we are going to build, share, and grow together using AI. In particular, I'm going to talk about my journey to build confidence using AI tools as part of my marketing practice while keeping the human at the center of the work that I do. A little bit about me. I like to say I'm a marketer, runner, and mother, and amateur Swiftie in no particular order. My career has been a journey from running the admissions process at a dental school, cookbook editing, ad tech, and for the last 15 plus years, developer marketing and developer relations. But what's at the core of that work is building programs and experiences that have connected people with the information they need to make good decisions and be successful. And in today's session, I'm going to talk about the role that AI tools can play in building out those programs and experiences in a meaningful, trustworthy, and authentic way. So, let's start with this set of questions. Do any of these describe feelings you've had over the last, say, 4 to 5 years when you've encountered AI technology? A feeling of being overwhelmed by the shift in how to do work with this technology. Unsure what work is actually most meaningfully done this way. Anxiety about staying relevant in one's job. Worry about the trust, ethics, and impact of this technology. And most importantly, wondering where your human brain, body, and heart fits into this new age of work. If any of these describe you, congratulations, you're in the right place. But if we're being honest, this session is for me. This is the session I wish I had seen at marketing conferences over the last couple of years. I've gone to a number of product marketing events, and there have been a plethora of AI for marketing sessions, and I walk away from each one saying, I don't know where to begin. This feels really overwhelming. Is this the most meaningful way to get work done? And so with this opportunity through Women on Stage, I said, why don't I create the session I wish somebody had created for me when this massive change in how work gets done started? Because ultimately, what we're all going through right now is this change curve journey. It's really, really overwhelming. We've been told that the skills that we've spent the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years building up are no longer relevant. We're asking ourselves, how relevant are humans in this journey? And ultimately, this is the expectation of how work is going to get done. So how do we get to that place where we truly can move on? And that's what I'm going to share today. So where did this journey begin? We're going to go back to December 2022. This was about a month after a major ChatGPT public launch. I had a really delightful first experience, which is my husband knows I'm a huge Austenite, and he gifted me Jane Austen fan fiction created by ChatGPT. And so my first reaction is, wow, this is fun, this is novel, this is delightful. Fast forward probably 12 hours, out for a walk with a good friend who's an engineer, who starts talking about how these tools are going to massively expedite and simplify coding, that they're going to be able to recreate videos and voices and images and things like that. And I very quickly went from this feeling of, wow, this is really novel and delightful, to Kurt Vonnegut's 1952 novel, dystopic fiction, Player Piano, where a supercomputer essentially automates all of the jobs, and there's massive social inequality. And so I was left with this feeling of, is this really where we're going? I was very, very uncomfortable. Fast forward about a month, and I had the luck of seeing Dr. Vivian Ming speak. She is a computational neurobiologist and spoke really eloquently saying, don't be afraid of this technology. It is tools. The humanness is still at the center of what is being created. We just now have new tools in our toolkit. So I've, relatively quickly went from that feeling of the player piano to what I like to say is the Plazer 15 effect. For those of you who are Mandalorian fans, this was in season 3 if you made it that far, and it was this utopian planet where they had created robots that were going to automate away the drudgery, and they really had lives of leisure. Now, of course, the lesson we take from this is also that if humans are not responsible with that technology, mayhem can ensue. But for the most part, it was this feeling of, oh, okay, these tools can be good. And then within the next couple of weeks, when every company realized, oh my gosh, we need to play catch up with all of this, I like to say that we entered the era of put a GPT on it. For those of you who are Portlandia fans, instead of a bird, it's a GPT. And as somebody who had built a career in developer marketing and developer relations that was all about authenticity, about trust, about having a product that you could try that was going to solve problems, that sense that companies were just running away with promising solutions that didn't exist or making massive employment decisions based on what this technology may be able to do to a workforce returned me to that place of player piano. And yet, I also realized the train had left the station, and that to be a tech worker in this era did mean being on that train. And so I needed to move myself from this fear on the change management curve of the player piano effect to really seeing GPT tools in particular and all of the supporting solutions around them as tools in my toolkit that would allow me to be an effective tech worker. And so I asked myself this question of how do we balance the tension of productivity that these tools can offer and what makes the human body, brain, and heart uniquely suited to getting work done? Because as much as I want to automate away the drudgery, I don't want us to lose the ability for the human brain to create brilliant words like what Jane Austen did or what Taylor Swift does. And so how can we strive for this balance? And in the examples that I'm going to walk through today, I'm going to share how I've come to that balance and add some fun and inspiration with some Taylor Swift songs and lyrics along the way. So don't worry, I'm not afraid of little old Gemini. I'm not snarling nor disturbed. And so I'm going to go through 3 sets of examples. How GPT tools have helped me get over writer's block, how they've allowed me to do fast analysis and data validation, and how they've allowed me to enhance instructional workshops instead of doing manual analysis, doing AI prompted insights. So, baby steps. I like to say the blank space was really the baby steps to become familiar with not just how these tools worked, but most importantly, the role that the human brain, human insight, human emotion can play and how effectively they can work. And that really comes down to prompting. Because for these tools to be meaningful and effective, and you're going to hear this drumbeat throughout, we need to understand what questions we're asking, how to ask those questions meaningfully, and how to validate the output of what they're creating. So my first example here, and for anybody who's a recovering events professional, the next couple of examples may hold some truth and inspiration. So my children love scavenger hunts on their birthdays. And in the past year, my daughter has decided that the scavenger hunts I had created were not challenging enough. And knowing she's probably even more of a Swiftie than her mother, I decided to do it based on clues from Taylor Swift songs and lyrics. Now, I know Taylor Swift's work reasonably well, but there are a lot of songs. And so I just needed a little bit of help sifting through them. So I put in this prompt with some clues. I actually used both ChatGPT and Gemini to see the similarities and differences. And out of all of these was able to say, okay, these are songs she probably reasonably is going to know. These are songs that seem to fit the clues most meaningfully. Here's some songs I was thinking about on my own. And ultimately was able to come up with a scavenger hunt for her that was sufficiently challenging. Next was throwing a surprise party for a friend who is a huge fan of the game Clue. And so my colleagues and I came up with a list of desserts that we were going to offer that were themed based on the colors of the characters. And I said, you know, they really need some catchy names and we need some print material to accompany them. And so was able to come up with some fun, on point, on theme names to accompany the desserts and the surprises. And now getting into more professional context, how have I used this to prepare content? The first is really starting from a blank space. Having an idea for an abstract and just feeling like I had writer's block. Putting in a prompt, getting output and saying, how much of this actually sounds like me and how much of this needs to be edited? But it gave me something to react and respond to. The next is, I actually wrote the title and abstract for this particular session and just wanted a gut check on structure, on tone, and to make sure that there was a clear action item for all of you. Finally, and this was perhaps one of the most fun or more sophisticated, is through a number of leadership books, speakers, and content pieces, had started to connect the dots and themes between the book Active Parenting, the author of the book Humbition, and Taylor Swift's 6-part docuseries on the Eras Tour. By putting in well-structured prompts, analyzing them based on what I already knew, having been exposed to that content, was starting to create a leadership framework that I can reflect on in my own leadership practices as well as in content that I want to create. But one thing, again, that you've probably heard through all of this is the reason that I was able to use these tools in what felt like a meaningful and authentic way is that I had a very clear sense of the type of research that I wanted to do. I had enough familiarity with the content that I was able to validate the findings and to know when I needed to put in further prompts for clarity and confidence. And that leads us into the next example, which is actually deeper analysis of data. And so for any of us who work in a practice where we're doing surveys, where we're looking at research reports, where we're really trying to pull out those insights and the pivot tables just won't do, how can we challenge ourselves to go through the process of broad to deeper analysis using these tools? And so in this case, I used Claude's tools. The example here is from a survey from a nonprofit that I'm part of, that I'm on the leadership team for. And I started off and said, I've had an opportunity to eyeball the results. I have a general sense of what the themes, but I'd really like to see if those themes are holding true when they're put into one of these tools. And so I started with a very broad prompt, which is, what are some of the patterns that you could find? That was helpful, but now knowing that this is a very large organization with people who have been part of it for upwards of 30, 40 years, with age groups represented from early 20s up until the 70s and 80s, I'd really like to understand, do these patterns hold true by age group and by tenure? The next is, how are these holding up year over year? Ultimately though, again, I had eyeballed the results, I had done some pivot tables, I had some initial hypotheses, But I wanted to feel confident that when I was presenting this outcome to the board of the nonprofit, when I was presenting it to the members of the organization, when I was presenting it to the coaches of the organization, that I could feel confident that the data that I was seeing was valid. And what's really interesting is when I put the same prompt into another tool, they had actually pulled out as an example something that had only been mentioned singularly. And so that gave me pause to say, are the patterns they're seeing based on a single qualitative comment, or are they actually holding true across both qualitative and quantitative outcomes? And by asking this question in Claude, it gave me an extensive answer so that I could actually see the methodology that they used. Again, the pause here is the reason that I was able to feel confident in this is I've taken quantitative and qualitative research methods classes. And so I do know how to do this research on my own. This expedited the research. But it is this cautionary moment of saying, if a person has not done that, there is that human step that is missing to make sure that the right prompts are being entered and the right validation is happening. And that's again where I like to say these tools are a tool in the toolkit. They were able to automate away drudgery. They were able to save me time. But without the human knowing how to do the research and without the human knowing how to validate that research, there's a real risk that this information could be presented. And if further questions were asked, somebody might not be able to actually follow up and understand where the results came from. The final example that I'll walk through quickly is how I was able to take that practice, take the content creation, take the data analysis and validation experience, and incorporate it into a technical marketing workshop that I deliver. For this workshop, I have folks walk through the exercise to understand a user audience and to start to put together the wireframe of a marketing plan using charts that I have printed out. Knowing that the way product marketers now do work is using these AI tools, I said, how can I uplift this workshop using Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, and so forth? So what I do is present a scenario, and then I ask the question of list 3 attributes of a prospective user. Again, last year they would have looked through charts, maybe they would have gone online and dug through some Stack Overflow data, but it would have been relatively manual. Now I'm going to ask them to think of a prompt that they can put in to ask the same question. And again, making sure that they know the sources of that information for further investigation. And so here's an example of what that output might look like. Next, the challenge was to draft a pitch statement based on the product solution and the prospective user. And so now the goal is to have them write a meaningful prompt that can connect the dots between those two things. And here's an example of what that output might be. Now, it will then be for us to say, is this generic? Does this fit the brand of the company? We could potentially further clarify and say, this is the organization's brand, this is its identity, this is its tone. Can you gut check this to make sure that it matches that tone? But it gives us a starting point from which to work. And then finally, how can we make sure that we have some campaign assets that actually match what we know about the user and what we know about the draft message? Not only did I get these primary tactics, I ended up with about 15 pages and a comprehensive marketing plan, including a budget breakdown. Now again, as I had shared with the previous example, there is a human side to this. One piece is self-education. This workshop is tailored towards folks that are moving from more traditional B2C and B2B marketing roles into business to developer roles, and they may not be familiar with the developer audience, which is why the human side of this is so important. It's not just getting the answers, it's getting the sources to the answers for that further deep education to build up subject matter expertise and credibility in the space. In addition, you could look at the results of those marketing strategies and say, is this really going to be a match? And when you look at the data validation, which is what I have here at this bit.ly link, you'll see that it is trusted and true experts within the space that the answer has pulled from. But again, without taking that additional step of saying, what are the resources behind this? And then taking time to pattern match oneself with that information, one really could run the risk of putting out ideas that they don't have the expertise on, that they can't necessarily justify, or that they can't explain with any kind of depth. So, if we're going to recap what we learned, what I have found in my own practice that really helped me work through that change management curve, that really helped me find that balance between player piano and Plazer 15, that allows me to feel like I can be a productive and relevant tech worker while making sure that the work I am producing is authentic, meaningful, and trustworthy, is to see these tools as a way to help ideas go from seeds to sprouts, and truthfully to be a first-line proofreader when a friend isn't around. It's also been a way to automate away that drudgery, to quickly analyze data and validate observations, but to also make sure that the data isn't just telling me what I want to hear, but that the prompts are being asked in a way that really reflects an understanding of how qualitative and quantitative research is done. And ultimately, knowing that these prompts can generate meaningful strategies and opportunities for self-education. That the work doesn't stop with the answers that they generate, but that the work is really just a starting point, that we can become subject matter experts, that we can become thought leaders, and that we can become influencers internally and externally with the strategies that we're putting out into the world. And that we really can see these as tools in our toolkit. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Women on Stage. And I am thrilled to have been part of this event, and I look forward to engaging with many of you if you have questions around this session, as well as engaging with the content that you're creating. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.